you're 17 years old, lying on a dirt floor, your belly swollen with your fourth pregnancy in 6 years. None of your children are yours. The first one, a boy, was sold when he turned 3. You can still feel his face pressed against your chest that morning. You can still hear the sound he made when they ripped him away. That sound follows you into sleep every night. The second, a girl, went to Mississippi. She was 18 months old. In the records, she has no name, just a number, just a price. The third died inside you. The overseer beat you in your 7th month because your hands moved too slow in the cotton. They made you dig a hole in the ground and lie face down so the whip wouldn't damage your belly. It didn't work. You lost her anyway. Now there's a fourth coming, and you already know this one isn't yours either. Because to them, you're not a mother. In the plantation ledgers, you're listed the same way they list cattle. Your name doesn't appear, just your age, your health, and one word that seals your fate. Fertile. This is America, 1842, Virginia. And what's happening to you isn't a crime. It isn't abuse. It isn't even unusual. It's an industry. They called it natural increase. But there was nothing natural about it. This is the story of the breeding farms, the darkest chapter of American slavery that they never taught you in school. Before we continue, if this story grips you, drop a like and subscribe. It takes a second and helps us keep unearthing the voices the world chose to silence. In 1808, the United States banned the importation of slaves from Africa. Politicians celebrated, abolitionists cheered. The world believed America was taking its first step toward ending slavery. They were dead wrong. The ban didn't weaken slavery. It transformed it into something far more calculated, far more profitable, far more horrifying. Before 1808, if a plantation owner needed more workers, he bought them from ships arriving from Africa. After 1808, there were no more ships. The supply was cut off. But the demand was exploding. Cotton was king. The invention of the cotton gin had turned the Deep South into an agricultural gold mine. Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas. They needed bodies. Hundreds of thousands of bodies to work fields that stretched to the horizon. So the Upper South found a new cash crop. Not tobacco, not wheat. People. Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky. These states stopped growing crops and started growing slaves. Thomas Jefferson himself told George Washington that the birth of black children was increasing Virginia's capital stock by 4% annually. Read that again. The third president of the United States. Author of All Men Are Created Equal. Calculating human reproduction and the way a rancher calculates cattle yields. By 1860, the total value of enslaved people in America was $4 billion. More than all the banks in the country combined. More than all the currency in circulation. More than every railroad and factory put together. Slaves weren't just labor. They were money itself. They were collateral for loans. They were inheritance passed down through generations. Newborns were described in financial terms as interest, the return on investment from purchasing their mothers. And Virginia? Virginia alone exported over 300,000 enslaved people to the Deep South between 1800 and 1860. Richmond became one of the largest slave markets in the Western Hemisphere. But here's what the textbooks don't tell you. To meet this demand, slaveholders didn't just hope their slaves would have children, they engineered it. And to understand how, you need to see it through their eyes. You're barely a woman, still a girl, really. A man is examining you. His hands grip your jaw, tilting your head back. He's checking your teeth the way you check a horse before buying it. He looks at your frame, your build. He writes something in a ledger. Then he assigns you a husband, a man twice your age, a man you've never spoken to, a man chosen for one reason only, his size. Tonight you'll be locked in a cabin with him. Please, you whisper. Please, I don't know him. The overseer doesn't look at you. You'll know him come morning. The door closes. You hear the lock turn. This was the system, documented across thousands of plantations. The Massey family of Virginia kept records for over a century. They called it their stock book, the same term used for livestock. In those pages, they documented over 350 enslaved children born, raised, and sold for profit. The mechanics were brutal and precise. On breeding plantations, the ratio of women to men was deliberately skewed. Women were evaluated like animals at market. Age mattered. The younger and healthier, the better. Hips mattered. A woman who had already proven she could bear healthy children was worth significantly more. Some plantations used what survivors called stockmen. Maggie Stenhouse, interviewed by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, described what she witnessed. During slavery, there were stockmen. They was weighed and tested. A man would rent the stockman and put him in a room with some young women he wanted to raise children from. The stockmen were enslaved men, selected specifically for their size and strength. They were treated marginally better. More food, less field work. In exchange, they were forced to breed. When the enslaver went to unlock the room the next morning, one survivor recalled, the enslaved man was glad to be released. "Them women nearly killed him," she said. "The women fought back. They scratched. They bit. They resisted with everything they had. But resistance had consequences," another formerly enslaved woman testified. The women hated him, and the men on the place did as well. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone was either complicit or victimized. There was no escape from the system. Frederick Douglass wrote about a woman named Caroline. She was purchased specifically for breeding by a poor white enslaver named Edward Covey. Covey couldn't afford many slaves, so he bought one woman and hired a man named Bill Smith to father her children. Douglass wrote that Covey compelled Caroline to abandon herself to the object for which he purchased her. The object, not the man. The object. That's how they saw these women, as objects that produced other objects. Covey locked Caroline and Bill Smith in a room together every night. At the end of the year, Caroline gave birth to twins. Douglass wrote, "At this result, Mr. Covey seemed to be highly pleased, both with the man and the wretched woman. Such was his joy, and that of his wife, that nothing they could do for Caroline during her confinement was too good." The children, Douglass noted, were regarded as being quite an addition to his wealth. And once you were selected, once you were marked as a breeder, your life became a cycle with no exit. You're 23 now. 6 births in 9 years. Your body carries the evidence. The scars on your back, the stretch marks, the exhaustion that never leaves. Your first child, the boy, would be 12 now. Old enough to work the field somewhere, you don't know where. Mississippi maybe, or Louisiana. You heard they needed workers there. You don't know if he's alive. You'll never know. The girl would be 10. You try not to picture her face because you've started to forget it. And that terrifies you more than the overseer's whip, more than the locked rooms, more than the next pregnancy already showing. The third one never breathed. The fourth was sold at 18 months. You had learned by then not to name them. Naming them made it harder when they disappeared. The fifth you didn't name either. Gone at 2 years old. Now you're pregnant again. The sixth, and you feel nothing. No hope, no fear. Just a dull emptiness where something human used to be. you wonder if you're still a person at all. This was the cycle. Documented, deliberate, designed to break women completely. Some women bore 10, 12, 15 children over their lifetimes and kept none of them. Rose Williams, interviewed decades after emancipation, still carried the weight of what happened to her. She described being forced to share a cabin with a man named Rufus. When she resisted, her enslaver threatened to whip her. She said, "I thinks about Massa buying me off the block and saving me from being separated from my folks. I thinks about being whipped." There it is. What can I do? 4 words that echo across thousands of testimonies. What can I do? In the Massey family stockbook, children are listed as increase, the same financial term you'd use for interest accumulating in a bank account. The moment they could work, around age 5 or 6, they began generating profit. The moment they could survive separation, around age 2 or 3, they could be sold. Families were separated without warning. Mothers returned from the fields to find their children gone. No goodbye. No explanation. Just an empty space where a human being used to be. One survivor described it. Babies were snatched from their mother's arms and sold to speculators. Children were separated from sisters and brothers and never saw each other again. Another woman, Dilcia Garlick, recalled the day they took her mother. "I never seed her again. I don't know what become of her. She was just a child when it happened. She spent the rest of her life not knowing." Another said, "I seen her plop right down to a setting and cry about it. But she allowed there wasn't nothing could be done, because it's the slavery law." The slavery law. As if law made it anything other than what it was. Mass-produced human trafficking, industrialized exploitation, systematic destruction of families for profit. And the men who ran these operations? They weren't hiding in shadows. They were respected businessmen, men like Calvin Smith. Calvin Smith ran one of the most notorious breeding operations in the Antebellum South. Historical accounts describe his operation housing between 50 and 60 enslaved women at any given time. His specialty? Producing light-skinned children. You see, mulatto slaves sold for premium prices. Lighter skin meant higher status in the slave markets, especially for what they called fancy girls, young women sold into domestic service or worse. So Smith used his own slaves to produce biracial children, children that carried his blood. Then he sold them at auction, his own flesh and blood, sold like cattle. This wasn't rumor. This was documented in contemporary accounts, including the narrative of James Roberts, an enslaved man who lived on Smith's plantation. Smith operated openly. His business model was known throughout the region. No one stopped him, no one prosecuted him, because what he did was perfectly legal. Women who resisted breeding faced violence designed to break them. Whipping was common, but whipping a pregnant woman presented a problem. You might damage the merchandise. The solution was documented across multiple sources. You're forced to dig a hole in the ground, deep enough for your swollen belly. Then you lie face down, your pregnancy protected in the hole, your back exposed. The overseer raises the whip. "Please," you gasp. "Please, the baby." "The baby's fine," he says. "That's the point. The first strike lands, then the second, then you lose count. He whips you until you stop screaming, or until he gets tired, whichever comes first." Think about that. A system so committed to violence that they invented a method to beat pregnant women safely. Safely for the pregnancy, not for the woman. Some women found ways to resist. They chewed cotton root bark, which could cause miscarriage. They took tansy tea. They did what they could to reclaim control over their own bodies. Some went further. Margaret Garner escaped from Kentucky to Ohio in 1856 with her husband and 4 children. When slave catchers surrounded the house, she made an unthinkable choice. She decided her children would never go back to bondage, no matter the cost. At her trial, she said she would rather see them dead than return to slavery. This is the case that Toni Morrison based Beloved on, because some truths are so heavy that only fiction can carry them. Harriet Jacobs, who escaped slavery and wrote one of the most important slave narratives in American history, said that slavery is terrible for men, but it is far more terrible for women. She wrote, "Superadded to the burden common to all, they have wrongs and sufferings and mortifications peculiarly their own." Mortifications. That's a word that doesn't capture what happened. None of them do. But if you want to understand the full horror, you have to see where it all led. Where these women ended up after the breeding, after the births, after the beatings. The auction block. You're standing on an auction block in Richmond, standing exposed. Buyers are examining you, squeezing your arms, checking your teeth, feeling your frame. One of them asks if you've had children before. The auctioneer smiles. "Yes, sir." 3. All healthy. Strong stock. That makes you more valuable. The bidding starts. You stand there while men argue about your price. They talk about you like you're not there, like you can't hear them, like you're furniture. "She looks strong," one says. "Good hips for bearing," another adds. A third asks the auctioneer, "She ever try to run?" You haven't, but you've thought about it every single day. The hammer falls. You're sold. You don't know who bought you. You don't know where you're going. You just know that everything you've ever known is gone. Richmond was one of the largest slave markets in the Western Hemisphere. Estimates say the city processed between 10,000 and 20,000 enslaved people annually during peak years. The streets were lined with slave jails, holding pens where human beings waited to be sold. Lumpkin's Jail, the Devil's Half-Acre, names that told you exactly what kind of place this was. And there were categories, just like cattle at a livestock auction. Prime field hands, young men in peak physical condition, breeding women, females who had proven they could bear healthy children. And then there were the fancy girls. Young women, often light-skinned, sold to wealthy buyers for purposes that had nothing to do with field work. They went for the highest prices, sometimes double or triple what a field hand would bring. The domestic slave trade moved 1 million enslaved people from the Upper South to the Deep South between 1790 and 1860. Historians call it the Second Middle Passage. 1 million people, marched in chains, packed into boats, transported in wagons from Virginia to Mississippi, from Maryland to Louisiana, from Kentucky to Texas. Roughly half of all those transported were separated from their spouses. Even more were separated from their parents or children. Thomas Jefferson Randolph, grandson of the president, testified before the Virginia legislature in 1832. He said Virginia was exporting 8,500 enslaved people annually. His exact words, "It is a practice, and an increasing practice, in parts of Virginia to rear slaves for market." To rear slaves for market, like livestock. James Golson, a Virginia legislator, compared the rights of slaveholders to the owner of brood mares. He said, "The increase from enslaved women consists of much of our wealth." These weren't fringe opinions. These were mainstream views expressed openly in state legislatures. The system had its own vocabulary. Breeding stock, increase, natural reproduction, fancy girls, stockmen, every word a euphemism. Every euphemism hiding something monstrous. And then one day, it ended. Drop a comment. Do you think this history was hidden on purpose, or just forgotten? The Emancipation Proclamation came in 1863. The 13th Amendment in 1865. Slavery ended. But the silence began. The breeding farms were never prosecuted. Calvin Smith never faced justice when he died. In 1840, obituaries called him old and very respected, and one of the oldest and most highly respectable inhabitants of his county. The Massey family kept their land, their wealth, their social standing. The men who built fortunes on human trafficking and forced breeding, they died comfortable. Their descendants remain prominent to this day. The women who survived had no recourse, no reparations, no acknowledgement. Many couldn't even talk about what had happened. The trauma was too deep. The shame, a shame that was never theirs to carry, was too heavy. But some tried to find their children. After emancipation, newspapers across the South filled with advertisements. Desperate notices from mothers looking for sons and daughters sold decades earlier. The Lost Friends column in the Southwestern Christian Advocate ran for decades, filled with the same desperate pleas, week after week. Sold from Richmond in 1848. A boy named Jacob, about 3 years old. He had a scar on his left cheek. Last, seen in Montgomery, Alabama. My daughter, Mary. She would be 26 now. She was taken from me when she was nursing. I am looking for my mother, Lucinda. She was sold from Petersburg when I was 7. Any information gratefully received. Searching for my 4 children, Samuel, Anna, Joseph, and little Mary. Sold to a trader in 1856. I have never stopped looking. These weren't just advertisements. They were open wounds printed on paper, week after week, year after year. Mothers searching for children who had become strangers. Children searching for mothers they could barely remember. Most searches ended in silence. The records were incomplete. Names had been changed. People had moved, died, disappeared into a country that had never seen them as fully human. Some searched for 20 years, 30 years, until the day they died. 4 million enslaved people by 1860. Only 400,000 originally transported from Africa. Where did the other 3.6 million come from? They were born here, deliberately, systematically, on American soil. Their mothers were not mothers. They were production facilities. Their fathers were sometimes strangers forced into the same room. Sometimes the enslavers themselves. Sometimes overseers exercising the power that came with their position. Their births were not celebrations. They were transactions. And their lives belonged to someone else from their very first breath. This history doesn't appear in most textbooks. It wasn't taught in most schools. For over a century, it was treated as an uncomfortable footnote when it was mentioned at all. But the evidence exists. The WPA narratives, the plantation records, the stock books, the bills of sale, the Lost Friends columns, filled with names that were never answered. The truth was always there. America just chose not to look at it. But we're looking now. The woman on the dirt floor? She was real. Maybe not one woman, but thousands like her. Women who were never meant to be remembered. Women who existed in records only as numbers, as prices, as breeding stock. She might have lived her entire life on a Virginia plantation, giving birth every year or two until her body couldn't anymore. Then sold south to work cotton fields until she dropped. She might have watched 10 children disappear, one by one, never knowing where they went, never knowing their names after they left. She might have died without ever holding a grandchild. Or she might have survived. Might have lived to see freedom in 1865. Might have spent 30 years searching for children who were taken when they were still nursing. Placing advertisements in newspapers that no one answered. Walking from town to town with a description of a 3-year-old boy who would be a man now if he was still alive. Asking strangers, "Do you know anyone named Jacob? Or Mary? Or Samuel?" Most never found them. That's what the breeding farms produced. Not just slaves for the cotton fields, not just profit for the planters. Generations of broken families. Millions of children who never knew their mothers. Millions of mothers who never stopped searching. A wound so deep that it echoes through generations. 4 million enslaved people by 1860. Every single one of them came from a woman who had no say in their birth. Every single one of them had a mother who loved them. Every single one of them was somebody's child. And most of them died without ever being reunited. The breeding farms didn't just produce slaves. They produced ghosts. Millions of them, wandering through history with no names, no graves, no monuments. Until now. Remember them. This is Crown and Dagger. We don't sanitize the past. We show you what actually happened. If this story mattered to you, if you believe these women deserve to be remembered, like and subscribe. More stories like this coming. If this forgotten history moved you, subscribe. Every subscription helps us unearth the next buried truth and fight historical erasure. We refuse to let their voices fade into the dust.